In a society where thousands of people have no permanent home to live in, is it the moral responsibility of big organisations to donate their land and spare buildings to help them? It emerged this week that the Republic's housing minister had asked the Catholic Archbishop of Armagh, Dr Eamon Martin, to make available some of the church's land in order to help the government's efforts to build much-needed houses. So what's the reaction been? On the line now, the editor of the Irish Catholic, Michael Kelly, and Michael Nugent from Atheist Ireland. You're both very welcome and thanks for being with us. Michael Kelly, Michael, to you first of all. Would you outline what has been asked of the church by the minister?
Yeah, so the minister wrote, as you say, to Archbishop Martin, and he asked if the church authorities would be willing to cooperate with the state in assessing what type of land might be available to provide to the state in order to build housing. Now, he doesn't go into what type of housing, but we do know the plan that the government envisages now, which has been launched, is a mix of social housing, affordable housing, and then your regular private housing. So that's really what the minister is saying in the context of what is really in the Republic an unprecedented housing crisis, and not just in terms of homelessness, which obviously is the most pressing issue, but the number of people who are simply locked out of the market because of rules around mortgages, and also because, particularly in larger cities and larger urban areas on the eastern coast, the sheer cost of property.
And has there been any reaction from Archbishop Martin, Michael?
Well, I think the first reaction actually was surprise, because the letter was leaked to the newspapers even before it arrived in Armagh. So I think that has led some people to speculate about the motives of the leak in the newspaper. I mean, one would imagine if this was a very serious and a very sincere attempt to work together between church and state to provide land for housing, that one might give the Archbishop the courtesy of at least reading the letter before he was able to read about it in the newspapers. The Archbishop then, when he did eventually receive the letter, said that he would be discussing it with his fellow bishops at the Bishops' Conference, which is due to take place in October. So that's something that's going to be on the agenda there. But if we look at other people, I mean, Father Peter McVerry, for example, the great homelessness champion in Dublin, he is pointing out to the fact, for example, that the government is already sitting on enough land to build 100,000 homes. So while he would welcome any initiative from the church that could contribute to this as well, he wonders why the government isn't just pushing ahead with the land they already have rather than requesting other land.
Well, the state is the biggest owner of land. How much land, though, does the church have? Is it known?
It's not known precisely, because contrary to what is commonly perceived, I mean, the church is not really one single institution. So property that is owned in one parish in rural County Tyrone remains the property of that parish, whereas, you know, a house, a church, some church land in Dublin city centre is the property of the Dublin Archdiocese. The same is actually true of the religious orders around the country. I mean, a bishop in a diocese, even if he wanted to, couldn't say to a religious congregation, couldn't say to an order of nuns, look, you're no longer using that convent. I want that convent to hand over for public housing or to provide accommodation for homeless people. They all have to go through their individual procedures around that. So, I mean, that means that the Archbishop of Armagh, who frankly is only nominally head of the church, it's a first among equals kind of role, really. I mean, he's limited in what he can do, in that any land that's available to him is simply land within the Archdiocese of Armagh.
Michael Nugent. Michael, you're welcome to the programme. What do you think of the government's request to the Catholic Church?
Well, if I could preface it, given the day that's in it, by starting by congratulating Michael on Tyrone winning the All-Ireland.
Thank you.
We hadn't forgotten, Michael. We were going to get to that at the end.
But on the main issue, I think what you've got to look at it in the context of what separation of church and state should mean is that the church is one organisation of many within a state, and it should be treated the same as any other organisation. But in practice, in Ireland, the Catholic Church has not been treated the same as any other organisation. It's got a lot of legal privileges and financial privileges, and that's because we used to be a Catholic country where the church used to control the people. But we're now a pluralist country. We're gradually dismantling the Catholic privileges that were put in place when the church did control the people. They include financial clout in schools and healthcare where they're running, but the state is paying for them. And they include, of course, charity law. And I think there's in the context of a new Ireland where everybody is treated equally, there should be a kind of moral trade-off that the Catholic Church should be looking at, which is that the privileges that they have had financially in the history of the Irish state, certainly since the 1920s, brings with it responsibilities, and they should be enthusiastically in a Christian context looking to help to provide resources for homeless people in the country. In terms of the amounts you're talking about, over 10 years ago, the religious congregations that were involved in running the residential institutions that were investigated by the Ryan Commission, those 18 religious congregations alone had assets of 3.7 billion. So we're talking about large amounts of assets, and that's, as Michael said, not counting the money in parishes and dioceses and schools and charities, which are all separate legal entities, and the complications of the setting up of trusts to move assets here and there and so on, and the requirement to get permission from the Vatican to sell certain assets. So there are complications, but I think the Church should be looking at it as a positive opportunity to give back to society some of the financial privileges that they've had over the years.
And Michael Nugent, I just want to stick with you because you raised the issue there of the abuse and the redress to survivors of abuse, and the Church still owes hundreds of millions in redress. So should they perhaps use the land to fund that instead?
Well, I would say as well, rather than instead. I mean, they certainly should pay the money that they owe in redress, and they should consider also contributing towards the building of homes for homeless people. I mean, the indemnity agreement itself was a scandal. It ended up with them saying that they would pay 128 million back in 1999 after the original documentary when the redress board was set up. But the costs are much higher than that. The costs are about 1.5 billion, which is well under the amount of money that those orders have. But they're still only offering to pay another 350 million. So they're still nearly 300 million short of what the government is looking for, which is essentially close to a 50-50 split. So they could certainly afford to pay the money, certainly that they've said that they will pay and that they haven't. They could afford to pay the money that they should pay, which they aren't committing to with regard to redress. And on top of that, they could also consider contributing some land or unused buildings towards homeless people. OK,
back to you, Michael Kelly, and that question, that morality question, which is at the heart of both of these issues, really, isn't it? When it comes to whether providing land to build houses for people who don't have them or the redress issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the one thing I would say is that already the Church is proactively engaged with local communities all across Ireland, both north and south, in terms of providing housing, particularly in the social housing provision and particularly in trying to end the scourge of homelessness. I mean, look, when I think of homelessness in Dublin, there's three names that immediately roll off my tongue: Father Peter McVerry, Brother Kevin Crowley and Sister Stanislaus Kennedy. I mean, the three things that they have, the one thing they have in common is that they're three avowed religious people, and I don't think anyone would question their bona fides on housing and actually providing services for people. So, I mean, that is something that is happening, particularly if you look, there are many towns around Ireland as well where local authorities have been found wanting, frankly, in providing traveller accommodation, and it's been local parishes and local religious orders that have stumped up the land to provide for that accommodation that's currently taking place in Blackrock here in County Dublin as well. Despite a lot of objections from local residents, that's something that the Sacred Heart Sisters are pushing ahead with. So, it's not something that isn't happening already on the redress issue.
But did they sell that land for 16 million euro roughly, Michael? I mean, these are big high-end projects worth multi-millions of euro.
The land in Blackrock?
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure how much the land in Blackrock sold for, but I certainly know that a significant portion of it was set aside, particularly for traveller accommodation and other social housing. I know that that's something that the sisters attached to it. On the issue of redress, certainly, I mean, I think there's a need for Church and State really to sit down and really work out that issue and see how that can finally be resolved, because I understand that a lot of the land that has been offered in terms of payment for the split in the redress. The government have said that they found that land unsuitable. So that's land that has been offered in good faith. So I think that both sides need to sit down. The other thing when discussing the assets of the orders, and this goes back to your earlier discussion about social care, we have religious orders in this country now. I mean, there are a few thousand elderly sisters in this country. The average age is about 74. Those are women who either need social care or very likely will need social care in the future. The orders have a moral responsibility to have enough money set aside to care for the complex needs that those women may have in later life. So it's not a blanket picture that all of this money is sitting around in an account just gaining interest. They have a lot of liabilities for very elderly members.
Okay, we'll leave it there. But Michael, before you go, how are you this morning? You had a great day yesterday.
Oh, elated. I mean, look, the party was still going in Dublin city centre when I left last night. All very socially distanced and all in line with guidelines. But no, it was a marvellous day. It really was. I mean, it was a day of agony and ecstasy, though, because, you know, the agony on the Mayo fans. I mean, I don't think anyone, even a Tyrone person, would have begrudged Mayo winning yesterday. But nonetheless, that's not going to mask my delight at winning. But the Mayo fans, they're such wonderful fans. They're such gracious people, and they really have endured so much heartache. But it was just wonderful to see the boys lifting the trophy. They're really a great lift for the county.
Congratulations to you and all in Tyrone. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael Kelly and Michael Nugent.